Hello and welcome back to our 9th grade video series. Today we're going to take a brief overview of the entire Gumball machine manufacturing process. Now while we work in class, we will do demonstrations on every portion of this project, and there are also notes available in the form of handouts that you can look at any time in the lab to review the process that we're going over. And as we help each other out, this process should go pretty smoothly. It is a fun project that everybody enjoys. So first thing we need to look at. To begin our Gumball machine project, we are going to cut out some material for the top and the base. Basically, we'll have some strips of wood in there that are 5 inches wide. You will use the power miter saw to cut off two 5-inch by 5-inch squares. For the top, you'll notice that when we do the top, we're going to use the router table, and we're going to router a fillet on all 8 edges of that board. So we're going to go around all sides, both top and bottom, to router a nice rounded edge on this piece. After that, we're going to use a circle cutter and a fixture to cut the large hole where the mason jar ring will fit in, and we're going to screw the mason jar into it. After that's done, you're going to determine what's going to be the underneath side. So you're going to want to determine what's going to be the best side. You may get some chipping from this hole when you create it. You might want to put that down. Put the best side up. Whatever is going to be the underneath side, I want you to take the letter stamps and stamp your initials close to the edge of the hole on the underneath side. The reason for doing that is we have a lot of pieces floating around the lab. It'll be very easy for someone to take your parts or you to lose them, so this way we'll know who belongs to what. Next part we're going to work on will be the base. First we're going to do is we're going to take that base and we're going to router a chamfer on the top side of it only. Now right now this piece is sitting upside down. This is the bottom. Okay, but there's a chamfered edge going around the top edge only. And the reason why we do that is it looks a little nicer. You could do all 8 edges, but most people decide that it looks better with just a chamfer on the top edge. You're going to determine what is going to be your bottom. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use this template and an awl to mark all 4 hole locations. You're going to take this over to the drill presses. They will be set up for the hole that drills all the way through and the hole for doing the countersink so that the screw sets in and doesn't scratch your coffee table when you take it home. And again, for this one we're going to stamp it, but we're going to do a little bit of a nicer job with the stamping. This will be the only stamping that will be visible when your project is done. Or if you do it correctly, it should be the only stamping that's visible when your project is finished. Because this one's going to be a visible one on the bottom, we want it to look nice and neat. You're going to want to put your full last name on this project. You may include your full first name or a first initial if you want to, but you at least need to have your full last name. And you're going to want to stamp the year that this project is completed. That way years from now when it's sitting at home and you pick it up and look at the bottom of it, you'll remember when you made it. Before we talk about any more parts, let's talk about abrasive papers. I know we always call these things sandpaper, but it's not really a sandpaper. It doesn't have sand on it. We use it for sanding, but it actually has ground up abrasive material on there. We ground up rocks called garnet, aluminum oxide. We do a lot of different things that we different materials for different type of cutting. Whenever you have downtime, you can begin to sand your project. Abrasive paper is graded by the screen used to filter the grit material, meaning if it's an 80 grit paper, there are only 80 holes per square inch. There are only 100 holes per square inch, and you'll get the idea as the numbers go up. You'll work your way up from a coarse grit, an 80 grit, to a fine grit, a 220 grit, sanding your project completely before moving up to the next paper. Sanding is not a lot of fun. It's always one of those areas that everyone hates to do. Whenever you think you're done sanding, you probably need to sand some more. End grain is always the worst. Whenever you're sanding the end grain on these boards, the top and the bottom, you've got a lot of sanding to do. So whenever you have downtime, go ahead and sand. If you're not sure if you're done sanding, let me know. I'll probably tell you to sand some more. And you always want to sand with the grain of the project. Look at which way the grain runs on that piece of wood and sand with it. If you sand against the grain, it's probably going to look pretty bad when you finish the project. Now when this whole project is finished, and before we start putting our finish, our clear finish or stain on the project, we're going to do a process called raising the grain. What happens when you raise the grain? We're going to take a wet paper towel and we're going to damp down the entire project. We're going to make it wet and let it dry completely, and then do a final sanding again with 220 grit paper. This will give your project the smoothest possible surface. What happens with this project as you've been sanding it? Think of wood fiber like little strands of hair sticking up, and as you sand some of those off, but some of them get knocked over. And even though your project feels smooth and looks smooth, as soon as it gets wet with stain or wood finish, those little wood fibers will stand back up again, making your project feel rough. So by raising the grain, we stand up those fibers, and then we give it one last sanding with 220 again, and it makes everything smoothing to give you the best possible surface. Next parts we're going to cut are the sides, the front, and the back. And if you notice, you'll start out, all four of these pieces will look the same. You're going to cut them from a strip that has a 45-degree bevel cut on both sides. And we're going to cut them 4 inches long. And then you're going to stamp your initials on the inside surfaces of all 4 pieces. Now, every now and then I'll get somebody that'll stamp the outside. So how do you know which is the inside? We're going to put these 4 sides together like they're a picture frame, meaning that this side that's facing up right now is the inside surface. Right here you can see somebody stamp this one. The outer or the longer side is the side that will be the outside. So make sure you're stamping the inside. After you get these pieces all stamped, you're going to give 2 of them for me for notching. If you notice, these top 2 have been notched. So what I do is I will take these 2 pieces and stack them up with about 2 or 3 other students' projects, and we'll just use our milling machine, and we'll plow out that section on everybody's parts, in a few shots. So we'll notch that out for the slide for the front and the back. Next parts we'll work on will be the slide and the tray. We'll cut those out of one single piece of stock, 2.5 inches wide. You're going to use the template. You're going to mark the end. You're going to mark the rounded edge of the tray, and you're going to use an awl, and you're going to mark all 4 of these holes. 1 hole there, 2, 3, 4. So you're going to mark all of those holes. You're going to drill all the holes using the drill presses, and the drill presses will be set up for the different operations that we need to drill. This hole gets drilled all the way through. This one gets drilled halfway through. We have these 2 holes for dowel rods that will stop the slide so it doesn't come all the way out of the gumball machine. You're going to use a chisel and a hammer. You're going to chisel out this end of the tray. So we're not going to just leave a hole, but we're going to make a little slot for it. It helps hold the candy better and keeps it from rolling across the floor. You're going to stamp your initials in between the 2 slide stop holes where we put the dowel rods. Now, which side do you stamp on? You could stamp on either side because they really won't be visible once the gumball machine's together, but I'd recommend determining which will be the bottom side of this thing and put the stamp on the bottom side. And again, the bottom will be the one where maybe the holes don't look the best or there's a mark on the surface. You'll determine that now, and then put your initials in the edge of it. For the tray, it's probably best to put your initials right on these 2 end pieces where they're not going to be seen after it's assembled. Now, continuing with the slide and the tray, you're going to carefully cut off the end. You're going to cut the end of this on the bandsaw. Now, your fingers would be very close to the bandsaw. You need to be careful. It may be best to grab a pair of pliers and hold this with a pair of pliers as you make that cut. We want to make sure that we're being safe in the lab. You're going to chamfer all edges on the slide just like we did on the base of the gumball machine. We're going to chamfer the top, we're going to chamfer the bottom, putting a bevel on there, and then you're going to want to sand all of this really well. So you're going to sand that slide completely, end grain, smooth it all out with a block of wood, sandpaper all the way up to 220. Then you're going to cut 2 dowel rods, 3/8 inch diameter dowel rods, 1.5 inches long, and glue them in place. Now, they're going to stick out one side of it. You're going to want to stick them out through whatever is going to be considered the bottom, because the dowel rods will be facing down when the gumball machine is put together. The front and the tray assembly. So we need to take one of these 2 sides that we notched earlier. We're going to lay this template on the piece and mark it with an awl. And we're only going to do one part. Do not do both of them. Every now and then somebody will do both of them. We only put the tray on the front. We don't put a tray on the back. You're only going to catch gumballs on the front of your machine. So drill and countersink the holes. You're going to do the countersinking to the inside, that chamfer, and one part only. In order to assemble the front and the tray together, we have to put these together before we put the box together because we're going to be screwing them together. We're going to use this tray alignment fixture. Basically, it's this little thing that I made to help us make sure the tray is centered, it's level, and it's at the right height. This is a two-person job. You're basically going to hold it in place, use a little bit of glue on there, and while one person's holding it, you'll use the hand drill to drill some pilot holes through the back, and use two 1 5/8 inch long drywall screws to hold it together. Make sure everything is final sanded before doing this assembly, because once this is together, it is very, very hard to sand it. So you want to make sure these two parts are final sanded before you put them together. And as you're sanding, be very careful not to round off these corners. If you round them off, it's not going to look too good on your gumball machine. So just sand that front face down to 220, sand the tray down to 220, and we're in good shape. We're now ready to start doing our box assembly. In order to assemble the box, you will need assistance. You'll need an extra set of hands to help with this process. What we're going to do is we're going to basically lay out the three sides on two strips of tape. So these two strips of masking tape are laying with sticky side up. We're going to place the back, the part that's going to be considered your back, with the notch for your gumball machine right on the center of that tape. And then we're going to carefully place the two sides tight against the back, making sure that the top surfaces are as flush as possible, and that there is no gap at all between these onto the tape. Stick them down so they're in the tape. And we're going to apply glue to all four joints, meaning you're going to lay a strip of glue on this, a strip of glue in here, a strip of glue in here, and a strip of glue here. Not too much. Doesn't really take a whole lot of glue to put that on. This is not a case where the bigger the glob, the better the job. It just means more cleanup work later on. So after you have those on there, you're going to carefully grab the strips of tape and roll those two sides up so it's like a U shape. And then you're going to place the front piece that has the tray onto it. Finish rolling the tape around, making sure the joints are tight, and it'll look like this when it's all finished. You're going to need to allow that to dry overnight until tomorrow, and then you can sand the entire surface and sand the corners to make it look really good. The next step is to apply the center divider. The center divider is what keeps your gumballs or whatever candy you put in your machine from falling down into the box. You know, this lines up with a hole in the tray and the slide that allows it to pull the candy out. So you're going to cut and sand a center divider so it fits a little bit loose in the box. We don't want it that it slides in very tightly. We don't want it that it's really sloppy. We just want it to be a little bit loose, so when we apply a little bit of glue on these edges and slide it up in from the bottom, it doesn't peel all the glue off of it. And when we put it into the bottom, we need to be very careful that it is perfectly centered and that these top surfaces are perfectly flush. It is very important that these surfaces are flush. If it's sticking out of the bottom a little bit or up in a little bit, it's not crucial, but it is crucial that you have this flush. We can always take the bottom and the tops and sand them on the belt sander to make them perfectly flat then later on. But again, apply the center divider. We're ready to assemble the base. So, after everything is final sanded, the base is final sanded, the end grain looks good, the chamfers look good, we're going to fasten it onto the box. We will use four 1 5/8 inch drywall screws to fasten the bottom onto the box. We want to be able to remove this base later on to be able to clean out the machine. We don't want to glue this one on, because at some point you may be getting little pieces of M&Ms or pieces of candy that will fall down into the box. The easiest way to get that cleaned out is to just take off these four screws, take the bottom off, clean it out, put it back on. When it comes to finishing, this is another touchy area that some people don't enjoy very much. It is a little bit messy, so you want to make sure you wear wool clothing the day that you're finishing. Finishing occurs before our final assembly. Right now we have three big parts. We have the gumball machine box, we have the top, and we also have the slide that are all separate. We need to finish them before we put this together. A finish is required for the project. You can't just leave it bare wood. You have a choice of finish. You may either stain your project if you're just interested in color. You may put a clear finish on it if you like the natural color of the wood. We can just put a couple coats of clear finish on it. Or you can do a combination of staining and clear finishing. Because staining just applies color. It does not apply any type of a buildup that gives you a nice look finish like most woodworking projects have. Stain only applies color. That's all stain is meant to do. It changes the color of the wood. And it only requires one coat of stain. I've seen students coming in 3 days in a row and trying to put on more and more stain, wondering why it won't build up. Well, you may make it a little bit darker by applying more coats of stain, but one coat of stain is sufficient. That's usually all you do with the stain. Now, if you're going to clear coat it, and clear coat it only, you're going to have to put on at least 2 coats of clear finish. So you put on a coat, let it dry. You'll want to lightly sand it with 220 and then do a second coat. If it's only clear coat, you may even want to go with a third coat. A third coat will improve the look that much more. If you're going to stain it and then clear coat it, 2 coats of clear will probably be sufficient. After the whole thing is stained and finished the way that you like it, we are now ready for the final assembly. So, after finishing, the mason jar ring can be inserted with nails before or after the top is attached. Now, the reason why I say before or after, sometimes people get a little bit excited and they start putting this together before they put the ring in the top. My recommendation is put it in before you put this together, because if we insert the mason jar ring by the instructions that I will show you in the lab, you'll drill some holes, you'll insert it, you'll actually put a bead of hot glue around the bottom of it to give it a little extra strength and security, and then we'll use a couple of nails to hold it in. If you get a little excited, get this together and realize, oh, I forgot to put the mason jar ring in, it is not the end of the world, we can still put it in, we just won't have that extra reinforcement of hot glue on the underneath side of it. So to put it together, we're going to insert this tray, because it can't go in afterwards. You have these 2 dowel rods that will keep it from coming out of the front or the back of the box. So we put the tray in, and then we use a little bit of glue, and we use a pneumatic pin nail gun to nail this down. So we're actually going to use the nail gun to put in 4 nails. Now we use a nail called a pin nail because it is a type of nail without a head. It is a very, very thin wire nail, and all you'll see is just a little tiny dot where they go into your project. They're almost invisible, so that's the reason why we use a pin nail. To finish up this final assembly, we actually now need to insert our knobs. These knobs that we use were designed on one of our 3D CAD programs, and we print them out on our 3D printer. Yes, we have a 3D plastic printer over in the drafting and design lab that we use extensively in our design and automation class, our automation and robotics class, because a 3D printer is a type of a robot. Now, we make them 6 on a block at a time. We'll cut them off, and you'll see there's some little blips of plastic here and there on these. So you want to use an X-Acto knife, and you're going to want to trim those off, and it'll be a light spot on the project. So we're going to have to sand them up a little bit. We're going to have to polish them up with a piece of steel wool, and maybe even put a coat of wax on them to make them look good again, and then we insert them into the front of the slide. And I make that note that if you did not put the mason jar ring on beforehand, we can put it on at this time. Here's a good example of the pin nails. If you can see them on the presentation, there are little dots on the piece to show where those pin nails go. And that's the final project. You now have a completed gumball machine. I recommend that when you take it home, experiment with your different favorite candies to see what works best. Some will jam a little bit more than others, so see what you like to use, see what you want to put into it. A lot of people get excited and they fill it up right away, which is fine, but make sure you take the mason jar back off after you're done getting candy out of it, and do that for about a week. You want to allow a week for that finish to dry really well. Otherwise, your candy's going to have a little bit of a woody, stainy taste to it. So I'd wait at least a week before you fill it and keep it filled. And that's it. Enjoy the project.